What is the rule against self-incrimination?
The rule against self-incrimination pretty much states that you cannot be forced to give evidence against yourself or to incriminate yourself. And that rule dates back to the 1600s when the Puritan religious sect, which had pretty much started in England, were evicted or kicked out of England. They went to Holland, which at that time was a very liberal country and still is. But they eventually got kicked out of Holland too because they were trying to proselytize to people there, and they went across to America. But when they were in England, they were being tortured and forced to confess to certain things. And because they wouldn't confess voluntarily, they were tortured until they did. And so that rule against self-incrimination originates back in that time, and it's been maintained in countries right around the world ever since.
What is the right to silence?
Right to silence is your right under the Constitution not to answer any questions put to you. It dates back like many hundreds of years to the 15th century to Edward Coke. He was a lawyer during the time of the monarchy, and at that time the monarchy had a right to command you to answer questions. There was the Ecclesiastical Courts in the UK. They could also launch inquiries against people. And if you didn't answer questions, it was deemed that you were guilty of an offense. And Edward Coke, is really the guy who's regarded by many as being the person who stood up, not just to the monarchy. They tried to buy him off, but he wouldn't be bought. He was too principled. But also to the Ecclesiastical Courts, and said, no, just because I don't answer a question, it should not infer any guilt on my behalf.
How long after drinking can you drive?
Again, it's non-specific. It's not scientific. People take chances and do it a couple of hours later. But the crucial thing to remember here is that, again, we process alcohol, each one of us, slightly differently. You could have the same amount of alcohol today as you had yesterday. Yesterday you're under the limit. Today you're over the limit. You had the same amount over the same period of time. But the difference is you're slightly over, and that might be because you're feeling a bit under the weather, you didn't sleep so well last night, and those little things affect how you process alcohol. How long afterwards? Many hours, but everyone, again, is different depending on their metabolism.
What does a criminal lawyer do?
A good example would be a jury trial, where your client is on trial for some offense that's alleged against them. Part of what you're doing there is picking a jury or getting a jury sworn in. And it's always good to have an understanding of the jury panel before you. For instance, if you've got your client has been charged with assaulting a taxi driver, well, the last thing you want to do is to let a taxi driver get onto the jury panel. Because if he gets onto the jury panel, he's very likely going to be biased against your client. So at trials, you have to kind of sift through the occupations, the addresses of the jury, and make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to be adverse to your client getting a fair trial.
Why is the standard of proof higher in a criminal case?
It's higher in a criminal case because in a civil case, if you lose, you just lose. And yes, you pay costs. It's a monetary penalty to you if you lose in a civil case. In criminal cases, the reason why there's a higher standard is because if you lose, there's a very real risk of jail. And judges tend to think in terms of weeks, months, years. So you'd have a long time in jail thinking about what went wrong. So for a judge to kind of make that decision to deprive someone of their liberty, which is what jail is, they have to be very, very sure. And that's why it's much, much higher than civil law.